I discovered my pampered sibling embracing my partner just days prior to her marriage ceremony. Informed her future husband, assumed he disregarded it, yet he stunned all attendees during the event. Being a 28-year-old female, I ended up in a tough spot concerning my 26-year-old sibling and my 29-year-old partner. Her nuptials were nearing quickly, and I started observing that her conduct near my partner was growing more and more odd. At first, it wasn't something obvious, merely minor, understated behaviors that made me feel unsettled. It started with apparently harmless remarks where my sibling would frequently comment things like, "Gosh, you're hilarious," reacting to my partner's humor, even if they weren't especially witty. She chuckled a little too eagerly at whatever he mentioned. Initially, I attempted to ignore it, believing maybe she was simply extra sociable because of the thrill around the impending ceremony. But as days went by, I started spotting more alarming indicators. She began creating reasons to contact him lightly, such as putting a palm on his shoulder while chatting or gently nudging him while passing by. These moves were discreet, but undeniable. I also saw her gaze remaining on him slightly too extended when he wasn't aware, which caused my gut to twist with unease. One night following our return from a relative's meal where my sibling had been especially playful, I chose to discuss it with my partner. I faced him and inquired, "Did you see how Sarah acted this evening?" He gazed at me puzzled and answered, "What are you referring to?" I then detailed the actions I'd seen, the overdone giggling, the unneeded contact, and the prolonged stares. He paid attention, but soon he just shrugged and stated, "I believe you're overanalyzing it. She's likely just thrilled about the marriage. It's innocent." Despite his comforting words, I couldn't dismiss the sense that something was amiss. The scenario didn't appear innocent to me whatsoever. Even with my partner's comforting words, I couldn't eliminate the impression that something was wrong. Thus, I resolved to monitor matters more attentively, wishing that I was merely exaggerating and my doubts were baseless. However, the subsequent weeks were stressful. Whenever we were near my sibling, I caught myself always observing her, noting every tiny action she took. It grew evident that she was continually attempting to place herself close to my partner. She would frequently position herself beside him when possible, and she appeared to discover countless pretexts to request his assistance with marriage-related duties, even when I was right nearby. One afternoon, we were all at my folks' residence for a relative's cookout. At a certain moment, I stepped indoors to use the restroom, and upon coming back, I witnessed something that caused my spirit to drop. My sibling and my partner were conversing softly in a secluded spot of the garden, positioned unusually near each other. My sibling was tittering at whatever he uttered, a noise that made my insides twist with discomfort. The instant they spotted me, they swiftly separated, and my sibling departed as though nothing occurred. I experienced a surge of sickness and fury, but chose not to challenge them immediately, avoiding causing a commotion at a relative's event. Instead, I held off until we arrived home that evening. Once alone, I attempted to address the subject as composedly as possible. I questioned my partner about what he and my sibling had been talking about before. He appeared taken aback by my inquiry and clarified that they were merely discussing some marriage specifics, such as the song choices. His reply didn't appease me. I couldn't resist wondering why such an ordinary chat needed them to be so proximate. He exhaled, obviously annoyed, and attempted to wave off my worries. He promised me again that nothing was happening, maintaining that my sibling was simply sociable. But at this stage, I couldn't restrain my emotions anymore. I voiced my irritation, highlighting that my sibling was essentially flinging herself toward him, and he wasn't taking steps to halt it. My statements appeared to wound him, and he stared at me with a hurt look, inquiring what precisely I wanted him to do. He pointed out that she was my sibling, and he was only attempting to be courteous. Instructing her to retreat seemed impossible for him. I informed him that he could at least establish some limits, clarifying that he wasn't interested in more than a platonic connection. But he maintained that he had no interest in her whatsoever, asserting there was nothing to explain since I was perceiving issues that weren't real. Our discussion circled endlessly, with neither yielding to the other's perspective, resulting in both of us annoyed and uncertain about the next steps. After debating for some time without a solution, it grew apparent that our talk was unproductive. My partner continued claiming that I was merely fantasizing, and regardless of my efforts, I couldn't make him recognize what was so evidently clear to me. Ultimately, we both retired to sleep feeling mad and irritated, with the matter still unsettled. The next morning, I understood that I had to address my sibling personally. It was obvious that evading the problem was only worsening it, so I chose to phone her and suggest meeting for a beverage. She agreed eagerly, her tone upbeat and apparently oblivious to my increasing worries. We planned to gather at a quaint coffee shop close to her home. Upon meeting, I was anxious, my fingers shaking a bit as I mixed my drink. My sibling, conversely, was cheerful, enthusiastically discussing her marriage arrangements. She appeared totally unaware of my unease, which only complicated the scenario for me. After several minutes of hearing her speak, I realized I couldn't contain it further. I cut her off abruptly, my tone revealing the gravity of my impending words. I informed her that we had to talk about something crucial. My sibling, surprised by the abrupt change in mood, stared at me astonished and inquired what was amiss. Inhaling deeply to calm myself, I started to clarify. I informed her that I'd observed her conduct around Tom, my partner, and it was causing me discomfort. I referenced the coquetry, the informal contacts, and the extended gazes, issues that had troubled me for a while. I stressed that her actions must cease. While I talked, I observed her expression shift through various feelings. Initially astonishment, then bewilderment, and ultimately rage. She insisted on knowing what I meant, strongly rejecting that she had been coquettish with Tom whatsoever. I declined to retreat, maintaining that she had been doing precisely that, consciously or not. I clarified that her behaviors were not just unsuitable, but were also inflicting significant distress on me. She replied with a chuckle, though it was anything but sincere. She informed me I was acting absurd, rejecting my worries by stating that Tom was basically kin, and she was merely sociable. Yet her statements did little to reduce the strain between us, and I sensed this discussion had hit a sensitive spot. As I remained there, it grew obvious that this wouldn't be a simple matter to settle, and the divide between us would probably only widen. I couldn't restrain myself further and voiced my annoyances, emphasizing that it exceeded mere sociability. I clarified that she was always seeking pretexts to be close to my partner, to contact him, and to giggle at all his quips, even those that weren't especially humorous. To me, it was apparent what she was up to, and it was causing me growing discomfort. While I spoke, I could observe her complexion flush with fury and incredulity. She was obviously stunned by my claims, particularly given their proximity to her marriage. She retorted sharply, doubting my self-assurance and implying that I must be profoundly unsure to charge her with such conduct. Her remarks hurt, but I knew I needed to hold firm. I attempted to clarify that my worries weren't rooted in uncertainty, but in regard. I informed her she was overstepping a boundary that shouldn't be overstepped, and her conduct needed to halt right away. Abruptly, she rose, her seat dragging noisily on the ground, indicating the conclusion of our talk. She stated that she wouldn't remain there and hear what she viewed as suspicious and ludicrous charges. She clarified that if I couldn't rely on my own sibling, then that was my issue, not hers. With that, she exited the coffee shop angrily, leaving me solitary with a whirlwind of feelings. I felt terrible and started doubting myself. Had I exaggerated? Was I truly just suspicious? Upon returning home, my partner instantly saw that something was off. He inquired what occurred, and I relayed the discussion I'd just had with my sibling. As I provided the particulars, I could see the worry increasing on his expression. When I concluded, he released a deep breath and informed me that he believed I'd committed a major error. He was concerned that Sarah would be profoundly wounded, particularly with her marriage imminent. Feeling protective, I asked if he was supporting her. He promptly assured me he wasn't choosing sides, but he voiced his skepticism that Sarah had been coquettish with him. Even if she had, which he deemed improbable, he thought that addressing her so straightforwardly wasn't the optimal method for managing the scenario. His statements left me feeling more conflicted, uncertain if I'd acted correctly or not. As tears formed in my eyes, I couldn't avoid asking, so what should I have done? Just overlook it. The annoyance and pain were evident in my tone. Noticing my anguish, my partner approached and softly encircled me with his arms. He proposed that maybe I could have managed matters differently, that perhaps I could have discussed it more with him initially or approached Sarah less aggressively. He voiced worry that now, given how events had developed, Sarah was probably distressed with us both, and this might overshadow her forthcoming marriage, making the whole thing feel extremely uncomfortable. Feeling swamped, I withdrew from his hug and challenged him. So this is entirely my responsibility. I needed to grasp if he really thought I was accountable for the scenario. He breathed heavily, obviously finding it hard to select the proper words, and clarified that he didn't intend to blame only me. However, he did believe that I could have exaggerated, allowing my feelings to overpower me. We kept debating for a time, but it became clear that we wouldn't achieve a solution. There was an obvious gap in our viewpoints, and neither appeared ready to completely grasp the other's stance. Finally, he chose to retire, leaving me solitary with my turbulent ideas and uncertainties. The ensuing days were loaded with strain. My sibling had ceased communicating with me completely, establishing a hurtful gap between us. My folks, having observed Sarah's anguish, contacted me, desiring to understand why she was so distressed. I attempted to detail the scenario to them, but from their replies, I could discern that they also thought I'd exaggerated. As the marriage date neared, I grew increasingly unsure about my actions. I was meant to serve as a maid of honor, a key position that now seemed more like an obligation. I wasn't certain if Sarah still desired my involvement in her special occasion. My partner, conversely, remained invited, and he recommended that we both participate to demonstrate no resentment existed. But the notion of being there, observing my sibling proceed down the path while aware of her anger and pain, caused me physical discomfort. The whole scenario had turned into a complicated tangle, and I didn't know how to unravel it without inflicting additional hurt. Multiple times I attempted to call Sarah, but she didn't respond. She never replied when I left messages expressing regret and suggesting we converse. I even went to her residence, but she shut the entrance. My worry intensified as the marriage date approached. Although I wasn't persuaded, my companion continued encouraging me to release it, that all would subside. In a vision, I appeared at the ceremony and all gazed at me, gesturing and whispering. I awoke trembling with chill. Update. After my clash with Sarah, matters worsened. When she informed our mother about my charges, she grew very angry. She phoned me, yelling about how I could be so self-centered and anxious just prior to Sarah's marriage. She exclaimed, "How could you charge your own sibling with something like that?" She refused to hear as I tried to convey my viewpoint. She instructed me to fix this issue immediately and express regret to Sarah. The pressure on our relatives was unbearable. Sarah still shuns speaking to me, and currently my folks are upset too. Tom, my companion, kept insisting I was amplifying things, which only rendered me more downcast and annoyed. I went to my folks' home to attempt to resolve matters 1 week before the ceremony. As I reached the entrance, I heard muffled voices from the side of the building. Curious, I walked to the yard and halted in shock at what I observed. Sarah and Tom were partially hidden behind a large shrub. Engaged in an intense embrace, they kissed deeply. Sarah's limbs were encircled around Tom's midsection. His palm was under her blouse. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice me there. I felt as if I'd been struck in the abdomen. All breath escaped my chest, and for a moment I couldn't shift or utter a word. As the truth of what I was seeing settled in, a strong surge of rage and disloyalty rushed through me. My feelings dominated me, and I discovered myself shouting, "What on earth is going on?" My tone quivered, laden with the force of my emotions. The response from them both was instant. My sibling and my partner leaped in surprise, their culpable looks fully exposing them. Sarah's complexion lost its hue, becoming ashen as she grasped she'd been exposed, while Tom struggled to locate the correct phrases, stuttering, "It's not what it appears." But it was precisely what it appeared, verifying every dread and doubt that had been eating at me. Tears started flowing down my cheeks as I gasped out, "How could you do this?" My own sibling and my partner. The agony in my tone was clear. Sarah also started weeping, her tone shaking with remorse as she attempted to express regret. "I'm truly sorry," she cried, fighting to justify. "We didn't intend for this to occur." But I couldn't tolerate hearing their justifications. The disloyalty was too profound, too immediate. Without further comment, I pivoted and escaped, dashing back to my vehicle. Their frantic pleas for me to come back were ignored as I drove off, my thoughts reeling with disbelief and pain. As I raced away, my phone started ringing persistently, first Tom, then Sarah, and lastly my mother. I couldn't force myself to pick up any. The hurt was too recent, too overpowering. When I eventually reached home, I felt detached. I promptly gathered a suitcase with some garments and necessities for a few days. I couldn't remain there not following what had transpired. I dispatched Tom a last message, merely declaring, "We're finished. Don't attempt to reach me again." Then I deactivated my phone, severing any additional interaction, and departed. Now I'm composing this from a lodging in a neighboring town, uncertain about my forthcoming actions. With the ceremony only days away, I know there's no possibility I can participate. My partnership is destroyed, and the connection I once had with my sibling might be permanently harmed by this disloyalty. It seems as if my whole existence has been inverted. Everyone caused me to feel insane for suspecting an issue, but ultimately I was correct throughout. The anguish of that awareness is nearly unbearable, and I find myself wondering how I'll ever rely on anyone again following this. So Reddit, any suggestions on progressing from this point would be valued. Update. Following the crushing blow of finding my sibling Sarah with my former partner Tom, I passed several days in a daze, battling to comprehend what had occurred. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts and unanswered calls from them both, plus from my folks, but I simply couldn't respond. I was too swamped, too wounded. However, I eventually realized that Mark, Sarah's intended, was someone who absolutely deserved the facts. With a burdened spirit, I took the tough choice to contact him. When Mark responded, I could detect the bewilderment in his tone. He inquired what was happening, noting that Sarah had been in a dreadful condition, claiming I'd vanished and wasn't replying to anybody. Inhaling deeply, I started detailing everything to him. I described the initial doubts I'd harbored, how all, including Tom and Sarah, had dismissed my worries, and then I depicted in depth the sight I'd seen in my folks' yard. Mark heard silently, without interjecting, only sometimes emitting a faint sound to indicate he was still listening, taking in all I said. When I at last concluded, there was an extended, weighty quiet on the line. Then, in a composed, deliberate tone, Mark merely expressed gratitude for informing him, noting that he required time to digest this data. With that, he concluded the conversation. Afterward, I remained there, gazing emptily at my device, pondering what Mark would do now that he knew the reality. As the ceremony date neared, I received no more from him or my relatives. Sarah had stopped attempting to reach me, and I started suspecting she'd somehow persuaded Mark to pardon her. The idea that she could truly avoid the repercussions of her deeds, that she might proceed with her dream ceremony while my existence was ruined, caused me physical sickness. I understood there was no way I could join the event. The concept of seeing Sarah proceed down the path, aware of her actions, was overwhelming. Instead, I chose to pass that day by myself, concentrating on reconstructing my existence after such deep disloyalty. On the night of the ceremony, I got a surprising call from my relative, Emma. There was a clear note of thrill and haste in her quieted tone as she exclaimed, "Goodness, you won't accept what just transpired." Puzzled and curious, I asked what she implied. Without pause, Emma launched into her account, describing the occurrences that had happened. She clarified that all had appeared ordinary initially. Sarah had appeared gorgeous in her bridal gown, and Mark had stood at the platform, prepared for the ritual to start. But during the promises, Mark had suddenly advanced and declared he had something to state. My pulse quickened as I heard Emma depict the moment. Mark, before all, announced that he couldn't proceed with the marriage. He informed the attendees that he couldn't wed someone who had disloyal to her own sibling and ruined her existence by involving with her partner. Emma proceeded, describing how Sarah had become entirely colorless at Mark's statements. Then, to all's astonishment, Mark faced my folks and expressed regret, informing them they needed to learn the actual cause why I'd separated from the relatives. Emma continued saying that Sarah had begun sobbing. My folks had been stunned and confused, and the visitors had started murmuring to each other, trying to understand matters. Mark had then exited the venue, leaving Sarah weeping solo at the platform. It was akin to a scene from a film, Emma informed me, her tone still marked with incredulity. All are stunned. Your folks are attempting to obtain the complete account from Sarah, but she's a sentimental mess. As I remained there, taking in all Emma had just shared, I experienced a blend of feelings. On one side, there was a feeling of justification, knowing the reality had at last been disclosed. But on the other, I couldn't avoid sensing a profound sorrow for the suffering and chaos this had inflicted on my relatives. Emma, detecting my quiet, softly inquired, "Are you all right?" I'm uncertain," I replied honestly. I never desired it to conclude this way. After a bit more talk with Emma, I ended the call and sat quietly trying to organize things, although the truth was revealed at what expense. My bond with Sarah shattered, my connection with Tom terminated, and now my entire relatives were in turmoil. I realized that while the facts were now evident, it didn't immediately repair all. Recovery and restoring reliance still required a lengthy path forward. But for the initial time since this whole experience began, I sensed a small relief. At minimum now, I could start progressing without the burden of concealed truths holding me down. Concerning what follows, I'm unsure. Although I know I'll eventually need to confront my relatives, currently I'm taking it one day at a time. If anything, this event has taught me the importance of heeding my instincts and standing up for myself even when others doubt me. To everyone who supported me during my path, thank you. Your encouraging words mean more than you can imagine. And to others in similar situations, remember, trust your instincts and don't let anyone manipulate you into doubting your own observations.